5. 2. Officer Commanding SOBDE HQ Coruscant Co-Fleet Protection Group from Co-Majestic off Calera. 367 days after Geonosis. I regret to inform you that we have recovered the wreckage of TIV Z590-1 and the body of pilot CT1127549. Perlemian Traffic Control reports that Republic civilian fighter Nova Crystal logs that it fired on a vessel it described as a pilot, attacking its convoy to dislodge it from the hull. I also regret that due to security restrictions, I am unable to tell PTC that the freighter killed a Special Forces pilot on active service, and so PTC regard Nova Crystal's skipper to be something of a hero. Fleet Ops HQ Coruscant 0600 368 days after Geonosis. The first anniversary of the battle. Scarata walked out of the Fleet Ops lobby and into a cool, moist morning that he wasn't expecting to welcome. It was over for the time being. Omega had survived, and they were coming home. They needed a break from continuous deployment in the Badlands, and he was certain they were needed here. CSF couldn't handle a big terror operation in the capital system, not even with Oblum around. The question was how to work that past Oliganze. The Jedi was reluctant to commit men to what he saw as security work at a time like this. But it was what Ordo and the Knolls were ideally suited for, if they had a few commandos to deploy as well. Scarata on the steps for a few minutes, inhaling fresh air, eyes stinging from fatigue, and raked his fingers through his crew cut. He could sleep now. Omega was safe. Ordo was here with him, and his 5 brothers were accounted for, safe and well. Miriel was on Commando. If Zay was heard to mutter that the Knolls were Scarata's private army, he wasn't entirely wrong. There were still 90 of the men Scarata had trained for from small boys on active service, and he worried about them too. But Omega had become as much his closest family now as the Null Ox. He would move the galaxy for them if he had to. The gold-veined marble fountain in the center of the plaza beckoned to him. He stopped as he walked past it and simply leaned over and plunged his head in the icy water, holding it there for a few painfully refreshing moments before jerking upright and shaking the water off like a mott. A couple of early morning pedestrians stared at him, and he returned the stare until they looked away. It was rare for anyone to even notice him. He made a habit of being inconspicuous, but today he didn't care. Did they have any idea what was going on around the galaxy on hundreds of battlefields? He resisted the urge to grab them, shake them, and make them listen to what was happening in their name. It was the first anniversary of Geonosis. Nobody seemed to be mocking that. Otto walked up behind him. You should get some rest, Kalbir. I'll sleep when you sleep. I have more good news. I could do with that. Damian's explosives profile. The reading from the prisoners matches up with the manufacturing characteristics of at least a quarter of the devices detonated so far. We got a break. Good work. And good old Dar. He smiled at Ordo, reminded again of how well his boys had turned out. Tell you what, Ordica, fancy some breakfast while the system gets on with unpacking that data. They do a distinguishingly greasy fry-up in the Kraget. It's not the sky sitter, but it sets you up for the day. Oda shrugged and tilted his head in a conspicuously self-conscious glance down at his spotless right armor. I don't think we're the sky sitters type of clientele anyway. Scarata couldn't see the expression behind the visor, but he knew Ordo was amused. It was good that a man who'd had an unimaginable nightmare of a childhood could find anything funny. They have napkins, and I'll try not to splash sauce over you. Deal? Just to celebrate the fact that we are both still here a year on. Ordo started walking. What were you doing a year ago today? Wondering where all my boys had gone? Sorry, Carabia. It was a very rapid deployment. I should have woken you. You did fine. I should have shaped up and realized you had a job to do. We certainly accounted for a number of enemy positions, Ordo said. I never said goodbye to the lads who didn't come back. That's all. I lost 9 out of my batch. For the last time you saw them, you left them, feeling confident, respected, and loved. That's enough for any beer to achieve. Thanks, son. How did he ever grow up this normal? Let's enjoy ourselves for a change, shall we? For a few brief hours, Scarata and Ordo did what normal civilians did, and took an easy ride to the city's lower levels to have a dangerously unhealthy but comforting breakfast. Scarata had never used public transport with Ordo in tow before, and the reactions of other passengers fascinated him. They sneaked sideways glances. Ordo's custom holster with its twin blasters probably focused them somewhat. The ARC Trooper armor was spectacular even in a city jaded by the everyday presence of 1,000 exotic species. Scarata regularly forgot how few of the capital's civilians had ever seen a clone soldier face to face. Apart from the heavily publicized display of masked guard battalions boarding assault ships at the military staging area a year ago, the vast majority of Coruscant had no contact with them whatsoever, and never without their helmets. Orica, he whispered, do me a favor. Take off your bucket, will you? Ordo paused for a moment, and then popped the seal on his collar, and lifted off his helmet. Scarata kept an eye on the other passengers' reactions. It was a revelation. Some looked blankly surprised. Others went a little farther. "Oh no, they're human," one man whispered. "And they're so young." Did anyone know how young? He hated using Ordo like this, but it had to be done. Scarata, tired and permanently irritable, bit back his retort and became a diplomat for a few moments. "No, sir, the war isn't droids fighting droids," he said. "May I introduce Captain Ordo?" Ordo nodded politely at the man in the seat across the aisle and extended his hand. Scarata had taught his little gnolls to act like nice boys when they needed to. The man hesitated and then reaches across to shake Ordo's hand, surrendering soft, pale civilian fingers to a black gauntlet. The look on his face said clearly that he hadn't expected to find flesh and blood inside the droid-like shell, or to retrieve his hand uncrushed afterward. "My pleasure, sir," Ordo said. It was unusually quiet in the easy ride after that. At least the reality had registered on them. Scarata nudged Ordo to get off when they reached the Kraget level, and the Ark replaced his helmet. "You like to shock," said Ordo. "I like to educate," said Scarata. "Sorry, son." Strolling around Coruscant with a fully armored Ark captain was hardly blending in, but it got him a good table in the Kraget, which meant one that the service droid actually wiped clean before they sat down. A couple of CFS officers acknowledged them. Police and security officers liked eating here because it was right on the edge of their manor, as some of them called the rough territory where they plied their trade. Handy for a quick response to a call, but far enough away to be a haven. Ordo took his helmet off again to tuck into the plate of fried smoked nerf slices. The eggs were from something Scarata couldn't identify, and knew he didn't want to. He concentrated on the seductively unctuous sensation of hot fat and salty yolk in his mouth, and washed it down with several cups of calf. "We can't leave this to the boys in the blue any longer," Scarata said. They both knew what this was without being specific in a public place. They're hampered by having to do stuff by the book, and we don't know if they're all playing for our team anyway. This is one for us. I'm going to make Zay see sense about it. Once everyone's back in town, it'll be a lot harder for him to say no. If the cryptography droid extracts some relevant data from Aten's little hall, it might be even harder. Which reminds me, I haven't paid my respects to Val. Promise me you won't pull your knife on him again. I'll behave. The server droid seemed to have been replaced by a female Trilek waitress who looked past prime dancing age, but who still distracted Scarata for a second or two. She put another plate of nerf strips in front of Ordo, who, like every clone soldier Scarata had ever known, would eat anything and everything put in front of him. She smiled and lingered. Oda froze and returned the smile in the nervous way of a small boy. Then busied himself with his breakfast, and the waitress moved away. Scarata reflected on the careless power of youth and looks, and how incomplete a teacher he had been of social skills. Somehow, I don't think she's mistaking you for a droid. Odo looked uncharacteristically flustered for a moment. I've been assessing our requirements. He cleared his plate again, and Scarata slid his unwanted eggs onto the man's plate and watched them disappear. Kit is an issue. We need to discuss this before you see Zay. This is going to take some serious resources. Vehicles, safe houses, special surveillance equipment, and ordnance. Scarata had been doing the calculations at the same time Ordo had. They need 2 squads, at least, and a couple of gnolls. But 2 squads of Republic commandos in their distinctively bulky Bad Boy Catan Mark III kit, and Ordo and Morel in their spectacular red and blue would be noticeable as unusual activity. They might need to wear that armor sooner or later, even if they could be deployed in civilian clothing the rest of the time. Scarata chewed the last overdone pieces of smoke nerf. He saved the delectable crunchy bits for last, and a solution blossomed as his jaw worked. Hide in plain sight. He was good at that. He could become so mundane, unkempt hair, scruffy clothing, that he was almost invisible. And so could his lads, by being the opposite. All they had to do was be one of a number of clone personnel wandering around Coruscant in full armor. And if occasionally they took off that armor and went about in fatigues, then who would really recognize them as individuals? They all looked the same to most people, other than a few Jedi who cared about them as men, and their own brothers. Scarata considered it a very productive-looking breakfast. He opened his comlink and keyed a meeting request to General Zay. Then he leaned across the table, seized Ordo two-handed by his shoulder pauldron, and gave him a noisy and exaggerated paternal kiss on the top of his head. "Sorted," he said. "Plain sight." The Trilec waitress watched, fascinated. "Hey, can I try that too?" "He's just a boy," Scarata said, and left her a very generous tip. Odo got up to follow him, pocketing a couple of meal breadsticks for later. My son. RAS Fearless Hangar Deck. "Good grief. Here comes the armored division," said Commander Giet. He strode toward the Namorian vessel. Its casing was streaked and pocked with scorch marks. Aussies looks like tanks, don't they? Republic commandos did look fearsomely bulky alongside the clone troopers. The first 4 to clamber out of the seized Trade Federation craft were a riot of color, their battered armor daubed with green, yellow, red, and orange markings. The second squad was armored in matte black, utterly featureless and grim. But Etain knew instantly who they were and which man was which. She needed no battle livery to distinguish them. Their forms in the force were almost like trails of phosphorescence in a tropical ocean, and they were instantly familiar, instantly old friends. I was only with them for a few days, and I haven't seen or talked to them for months, but it's as if we were never apart. Phi. Oh yes, she knew it was Phi, even before he spoke. Saluted, lifted his helmet, and winked. "Ma'am, you look like the back end of a bantha," he said, sympathetically. "Are they looking after you properly here?" Phi. She knew she was supposed to remain dignified and aloof, and she'd felt comradeship with many clone troopers in the intervening months. But her first reluctant command with Omega had utterly changed her. "Phi, I've really missed you. What happened to the gray armor?" You know how much Dar gripped about being too visible on Kulora. Anyway, he's brought you a present. He gestured over his shoulder. Damen was helping a group of troopers haul their prisoners out of the Nemodian landing craft while Get examined it. They're all in one piece too. We've been really good boys this time. Delta Squad had simply disappeared. When Etain looked around, she saw they had settled in a tight knot in a corner of the hangar deck, helmets on, obviously talking intently. She knew the body language now. They didn't feel like Omega in the Force at all. They were a concentrated well, a bottomless pool of something unyielding, and totally enmeshed with each other. The general impression they made on the Force was one of triumphant high spirits. Nina and Atin approached and clasped hands with her. It didn't feel at all inappropriate. They looked tired and anxious, and she wanted very badly to make things right for them. They were her friends. "I bet you'd like something to eat," she said. "Any chance of a hot shower in a few hours? Sleep first, please, General." Nina looked apologetic and shoved Phi gently in the back. "Me first. I'm pulling rank." "He's not really a sergeant, General," said Phi. "He just helps them out when they are busy." "Any news on our pilot?" Nina asked. "Yes, I'm so sorry." It was never easy. She tapped her datapad to bring up the copy of the signal that Majestic had sent to Fleet, and handed the pad to him. Nina glanced at it, blinked, and passed it to Phi. Phi parted his lips briefly, as if to say something, and then his slight frown almost crumpled into grief. He composed himself and just looked down at the deck. "He's not the first," Phi said, suddenly grim. and Etain had never seen that aspect of him surface visibly before. And he won't be the last. Etain watched them disappear through a hatch on the aft bulkhead. Trailing after a trooper, Fearless shivered slightly under the soles of her boots, making top speed back to Coruscant, and she waited while Darman spent what seemed like an interminable time fussing about with the prisoner handover. She wondered if he was reluctant to talk after choosing not to remain on Killora with her. Perhaps he was just concerned that nothing else went wrong. She gave up waiting and walked carefully between the troopers, still trying to catch some sleep on the hangar deck, curled up wherever they could find a relatively comfortable space. "Well done," she said, hoping that some were awake to hear her. Darman had changed. He bent his head to ease off his helmet, popping the seal, and then shook his hair and smoothed it flat with one glove. And although he smiled, he wasn't the Darman she had been through hell with. He looked older. Clones aged faster than normal men. He was 11, going on 22, going on 50. When she had first sensed him as a child in the Force, his square, high-cheekboned face had been both man and boy. At the stage of life when, had she been able to manipulate time, the slightest push backward would have revealed the child he had so recently been. But now he was a man, quite solidly, and with no hint of the boy about him. It wasn't simply that he had aged 2 years in one. The look in his eyes said he was much, much older. As old as the battlefield, maybe as old as war itself. She had seen it in the face of every clone trooper and commando and Orc she had commanded. She knew that she had the same look too. But Darman smiled anyway, and the smile broadened into a grin that made the rest of the ship, even the galaxy, utterly irrelevant to her. "You always cut it fine, don't you, ma'am? It's good to see you, Dar. Whatever happened to Etain?" She turned into a general and rear on the hangar deck. "You're right. I'm sorry. Is it definitely confirmed that we're going back to base? Unless you want to argue with the officer of the watch. I believe so. Good. We need a break. Just a day or two, maybe." He never did ask for much. None of them did. She wondered if they didn't know what the world had to offer them, or if they were just honed down to basic needs, too overwhelmed to think beyond recovering enough to do the job over again the next day. She patted his armored shoulder and held her hand there for a few seconds. He looked as if he suddenly remembered something and was embarrassed by it in a way he quite enjoyed. "It must be nice to be able to reach out to someone through the Force," he said. So he'd felt it. She was glad. "Get yourself off to the freshers," she said. Come and find me afterward if you're not too tired, and I'll show you over the ship. Have you met Sergeant Cal yet? No. Cal was always there for Darman. Somewhere, even at times like this, when she wanted to say so much to him. When we dock, perhaps you could introduce me. Darman beamed, clearly delighted. Oh, you're like him, General. You're really like him. Etain certainly hoped so, and if she didn't, then she'd try for Darman's sake. S.O. Brigade, HQ, Coruscant, 369 days after Geonosis. The smell hit Odo long before he reached the meeting room. It was a familiar blend of red wool, mold, and a pungent, oily musk. Scarata reacted visibly. He straightened his right arm by his side out of old habit, and let the blade slide into his hand, fall a fraction until the handle touched his palm, and then snatched it. Calbier. It would be better if I shot it, Odo said. He put a restraining hand on Scarata's arm. I won't let it near you. I've often wondered if you're telepathic, son. I can smell the strill. You have your knife ready. And we are meeting Sergeant Val. Telepathy isn't required to work that one out. Odo would have been quite content to shoot the strill without a second thought, because it upset Calbier. But it wasn't the strill's fault that it stank, or that it had a master who cherished cruelty, or that it had become savage itself. It had been selected by nature, and then trained by people, to hunt for pleasure rather than for food, and nothing else had ever been allowed to cross its mind. He felt some pity for it, but he would still kill it without a moment's hesitation. The door slid back. Odo placed his right hand discreetly on the grip of one of his repeating blasters. His attention went instinctively to Val, then to the strill lying on his lap, and then to the fact that he had a clear shot at both. It took less than a second to process the information, and then to subdue the impulse. Behind Val's head, the walls of General Zay's meeting room were a beautifully soothing shade of aquamarine. But they weren't working. Scarata wasn't soothed. And Captain Maz was sitting at the table beside Zay, arms folded across his chest, and looking none too impressed either. There was an ugly purple bruise at the point of his chin, more discoloration around one eye, and a cut on the bridge of his nose. I didn't think I hit him that hard, Odo thought. Unfortunate. Zay motioned Scarata to enter, just after the man strode in of his own accord, and indicated chairs at the lapis-topped table. Bogdan sat beside him, hands clasped on the tabletop, in an attempt at serenity. Well, Scarata said, and sat down. He ran his hand across the luxurious polished surface. This is nice. I hope I never hear anyone complaining about the guard's expenditure on armor and weapons. Cal, Val said politely. It's good to see her again. Val was settled in one of the deeply upholstered hide chairs, with a strill draped across his lap on its back, all 6 of its legs flopping in an undignified sprawl, while he scratched its belly. Its huge fanged mouth was slack, tongue lolling, and a long skein of drool hung almost to the floor. Its body was a meter long, lengthened by a whip of a tail covered in more loose skin. The strill was still prettier than Val, though. The man had a long, square-jawed face that was all bone, and frown lines, and graying dark hair cut brutally short. Faces rarely lied about the soul within. Ralan, Scarlatti said, nodding. Zay gestured to Ordo to sit, but he remained standing and simply removed his helmet. He transferred the bead-sized comlink connector to his ear, noting Zay's expressions without looking directly at him. Scarlatti looked up. Take a seat, Captain. Ordo obeyed only one man's orders, and that man was Kalbira. Zay was visibly thrown again. No doubt all other Ox and Commandos jumped when he said so, but he should have known Ordo by now. Maz certainly did. He was staring at his brother Ock as if one snap of Zay's fingers would give him permission to jump up and return that punch. Maz, perhaps you'd like to go and have a break, Zay said. This is just going to be a tedious administrative matter. Maz paused for one beat, his eyes never leaving Ordo's. Yes, sir. He grabbed his helmet from the table and left. Zay waited for the doors to close behind him. Let's hear your plan, Sergeant. I want to deploy Delta and Omega on Coruscant to identify and neutralize the SEP network here. Because it is here, said Scarlatti. It has to be in order to strike us so easily. And CSF doesn't have the expertise or personnel to deal with this. And there might even be someone inside the CSF passing intel to the terrorists. Zay's eyes were locked on him. Commandos are a military asset, not an intelligence one, nor police. We have theaters of war across. I wasn't planning to arrest anybody. This is a shoot-to-kill policy. I wasn't aware we had one. You haven't. So you'd better get one fast. I can't ask the Senate to authorize use of special forces against Coruscant's residents. Don't ask them, Scarlatti became pure ice at times like this. Ordo watched him carefully, anxious to learn more nuances of the part of soldiering that required no weapons beyond nerve and psychology. Is the Jedi Council squeamish about that sort of thing too? Sergeant, then don't ask them either. In fact, we never had this conversation. All you've done is tell me you can't ask the Senate to give his blessings to a change in the god's terms of reference. But I know what you're suggesting, Zay said. Scarata was fidgeting with his blade. Odo could see it. It was a tiny movement, but he could detect the flex of his forearm muscles through his jacket. Scarata has the point of the blade resting on his curled middle finger and was pressing it ever so slightly up and down. Preparations for dropping and catching the grip. The Jedi Council is pretty adept at turning blind eyes, Scarata said. For an organization that knew it was taking on an army with an assassination's capability, you do send out conflicting signals to simple soldiers like me. Thou was watching the exchange, like a man being mildly amused by a holovid. The Strill yawned with a thin, high-pitched whine. The difference the Senate will see, Zay said, is that this is Coruscant. General, the days when wars were fought elsewhere, while the home's fires were kept burning, are long gone. I know. But there are armies, and there are bounty hunters and assassins, and the Senate will be wary of crossing that line on home ground. Well, that's what tends to happen when you let a bunch of bounty hunters and assassins train your army. We didn't know we even had an army until a year ago. Maybe, but the fact that you're sitting here now with a general's rank means you've accepted responsibility for it. You could have objected collectively or individually. You could have asked questions, but no. You picked up the blaster you found on the floor, and you just fired it to defend yourself. Expedience ambushes you in the end. You know what the alternative was? Look, General, I need to clarify a few things. Being just a simple assassin and all that. Answer a few questions for me. They should have been furious that a mere sergeant was treating him as if he were an annoyingly pedantic clerk, rather than a battle-hardened general. To his credit, he seemed more intent on a solution. Odo wondered where expedience ended and pragmatisms began. Very well, said Zay. Do you want to stop attacks on vulnerable targets that are starting to compromise the ability of the Guard to deploy and are destroying public confidence in the Senate's ability to defend the capital? Yes. Do you think it's a good idea for some of our hard-pressed Special Forces lads to have an unprecedented break on Coruscant after months in the field? They paused just a breath. Yes. Do you need to ask anyone else to authorize that purely administrative matter? No. General Jusik is responsible for personnel welfare. Odo kept his face utterly blank. Leave. There was never any leave for the Gar, or their Jedi command, in the front line. Neither would have known what to do with free time anyway. Jusik looked pinned down. I do believe some R&R would be a good idea, actually. Scarata smiled at him with genuine warmth. Drusik was all right. One of the boys, all desperate courage and desire to belong. It was hard to tell if he was now playing the game or just being a decent officer. I'll look into it. And sir, Scarlatti said, is it true that you knew all along that I was a complete chakar, who could never follow orders, who kept you in the dark, who treated his squads like his own private army, and was generally a Mando lowlife, just like Django, and the rest of that mongrel scum? Zay leaned back in his seat and pinched the end of his nose, briefly, staring hard at the bluestone table. I do believe I might realize that at some time in the future, Sergeant. The corners of his eyes crinkled for the merest fraction of a second, but Odo spotted it. I have my suspicions. Proving them is hard, though. Zay was all right too, then. Val had been watching the exchange with mild interest, and Odo had been watching him, because he knew the man all too well. Sergeant Val, do you have any view on this? Leave situation, said Odo. Oh no, I'm just a civilian now, Val said. The strill rumbled. Val, apparently distracted, fondled its ghastly, stinking head, his slightly narrowed eyes revealing a doting affection that he never seemed to spare for any other living creatures. I'm just hanging around. When those detainees are released, I'll offer them a room for a while, and I'll have conversations with them. Nothing to do with the GAR or the Senate at all. Merely a private citizens doing what he can to welcome visitors to Coruscant. Drusik was watching the exchange, with an expression that suggested he was both excited and aware that the stakes had just been raised. They were subverting democracy in one sense, but they were also saving their political masters from decisions they could never be seen to take, yet had to. That's the worst thing about having Chakar like us around, Scarlatti said. We just wander off, find some place that you don't know about, and hole up in it, and get into all sorts of mischief that you also know nothing about. And then we bill you for it. Dreadful. Dreadful, Zay echoed. Is this the kind of thing that CSF might notice? Were we to get a little out of hand, I imagine very senior officers in CSF might need to be reassured, but not by you. Dreadful, Zay said. Hypothetically anyway. Language was a wonderful thing, Odo thought. Scarlatti had just told Zay that he was about to go bandit, as he called it, running an unauthorized shoot-to-kill operation in a civilian location, and simply sending Zay the bill. Val planned to interrogate the prisoners. CSF Senior Command would be placated by Scarlatti should anything go wrong, without any need for Zay to be involved. And yet Zay had authorized it all. and the subject had still not been discussed. I wonder if anyone will notice our commandos on leave here, Jusek said, apparently catching on. Probably, said Skarata. And wouldn't it be nice if we also extended that home deployment to honest, ordinary clone troopers? Lots of them. That would be good for morale. And reassuring for the public to see soldiers in armor around the capital. I wonder how I can persuade the Senate officers that it's a good idea. They cut in. Have you met Marugian, the Senate's head of public affairs? Just asking. Skarata nodded. I do believe I've had some contact with him, yes. Excellent, Zay said. I know you two will get along very well. And the conversations that had never taken place was over. Skarata stood to leave, and Vowel gave the Strill a gentle shove to persuade it to drop to the floor. It complained in a gravelly rumble, but settled at his feet, looking up at Skarata with red-rimmed gold eyes. Skarata's hand was still cupped, armed at his side in that way. Order knew often preceded a fight. Cal, I hear Atten's returning, Val said. Skarata walked out of the room, head down. Ordo right behind him. Jusek followed. You stay clear, Skarata said quietly. I'm meeting them all straight off fearless. That includes Delta. And they're not yours to run anymore, remember. You just sit tight at the barracks and wait for me to give you a location. Ordo wasn't fooled by Val's restrained politeness. 7 years ago, Val had loomed over him as a figure of authority in his black Mando armor for the first time. The Strill at his heels. His name was Lord Murdalan. Ordo, like all the Gnolls, had perfect recall. He sometimes wished he hadn't, but at least it gave him clarity, and he knew the source of all his fears and anxieties. Lord Murdalan, Murd, had lunged at him at Val's command, snapping. Ordo had drawn the little holdout blaster that Skarata had let him keep, and would have killed the animal had Calbira not yelled, "Check!" and brought him to a frozen halt as his blasted aim came to rest between Murd's eyes. Val, Ordo's recalled, had laughed. He said that Ordo was Javerd, almost a warrior, and Skarata had aimed a kick at Murd to drive it off, saying that there was no almost about it. Ordo watched the Strill carefully. The creature trotted ahead of them, sniffing noisily in crevices and leaving behind a raft of pungent scent and a trail of drool. If that thing's going to accompany you on jobs, said Skarata, you better keep it under control, or find a use for a Strill pelt. He drew up his arm and flicked his wrist before even Ordo could react. The three-sided blade shaved past Murd and thudded into the polished pleakwood floor a pace ahead of it. The knife vibrated to a standstill. Murd squealed, Leaping sideways, Ordo stepped between Val and Scarata, ready to defend Calbia in yet another confrontation with a man he loathed. But Scarata just turned to fix Val, with a stare that said he wasn't joking. Val stared back, his long, hard face suddenly a killer's again. "It's not the Strill's fault," Scarata said. He walked a few paces forward and pulled the knife from the floor. The Strill backed away from him. Lip crawled back to reveal its fangs. "But you have your warning, both of you. We need to get this job done. And that's the only reason I haven't gutted both of you already. Understood?" "I've moved on," said Val. "And it's time you did, before I end up having to kill you." Ordo really didn't like that. He ejected the custom vibroblade in his gauntlet, a better weapon at close quarters than his blasters. Scarata gave him the palm-down gesture. "Leave it. Stay useful, Ralon." He beckoned Jusik and Ordo to follow him. "And I hope that Atin's moved on too, because I won't stand in his way now." "How far is too far, Cal? Can you answer that? How far did you go?" Val called after him. "I made that boy a warrior. Without me, he wouldn't be alive today." With him, Ordo thought, Atin's very nearly wasn't. "Why didn't you mention to Zay that we might also have a leak within the Grand Army?" Ordo asked. "Because," Karata said, "I can't assume I know who it isn't. The leak might not even know that they're the one either. Until then, only the strike team will know we're looking." "What about Obrim? He's an ally?" "I hope so. But in the end, who are the only people we can really trust? Ourselves, Calbira. So we make sure we know who's watching our back. Kartari ad meg hukari kima." It was good advice to live by. Ordo knew who always watched his. RAS Fearless, inbound to Coruscant Sector Control, 369 days after Geonosis. I really shouldn't make a hollow of this," Commander Git said. He reached into the assortment of pouches clipped to his belt and took out a small recorder. "It doesn't happen that often." Etain and the commander of the assault ship stood on the gantry that ran around the upper hangar bulkhead and watched the extraordinary spectacle beneath them on the deck. She had heard of this thing but never seen it. It was the Dar Werda Verda, a Mandalorian ritual battle chant. Men from the 41st Elite and some of the ship's company, about 50 in all, helmets off, were learning to perform it with some instructions from Phi and Scorch. Sev easy to spot by the blood-red streak daubed on his helmet. Sat on an ammunition crate nearby, cleaning his sniper attachment and looking as if he wasn't interested in joining in. He was, of course. Etain could sense it, and she wasn't even properly attuned to Sev's presence in the Force. The Dar Werda looked fearsome. General Borden Jusik, a young man who barely came up to a clone's commando's shoulder, said he loved to see it, and drew so much courage from it that he learned to perform it with his men. It was Cal Scarata's legacy. Jusek explained that the veteran sergeant wanted his men to know their heritage, and taught them the right along with Mandalorian language and culture. Tong Sarang Bloka, Jeti Sika Ruta. The commandos were layering rhythm upon rhythm, hammering first on their own armor, and then turning to beat the complex tempo on the plates of the men next to them. Timed precisely. It was spectacular. Timed wrong, a soldier could break the next man's jaw. Da rada adin tratur. Koriskan takan dosi adu. Dromotir karlata no traknia. Gratura kun hit su dralshaya. It was irresistible, ancient, and hypnotic. The chant rose from the hangar deck in one solid communal voice. She recognized words like Koriskanta and Jetis. Coruscant Jedi. That couldn't have been in the original Mandalorian chant. Even their heritage had been remolded to serve a state in which they had no stake. It was Etain recalled, something to do with being shadow warriors and forcing traitors to kneel before them. They were supremely fit warriors, displaying their discipline and reflexes. Any flesh and blood enemy would have been adequately warned of the power of the forces that awaited them. But droids didn't have the sense to be scared. That was a pity, really. Etain winced. The blows looked real. They were putting all their weight behind everyone. Astonishingly, none of the initiates had yet timed the movements badly enough to receive an accidental blow in the face. Fire Scorch demonstrated another sequence. Armor clashed. Sev abandoned his feigned disinterest, took off his helmet, and joined in. Then Darman appeared, and they formed a line of 4 in the front. It was strange to watch Darman actually enjoying himself, oblivious to his surroundings. She had no idea that he had such a powerful voice, or that he could, for want of a better word, dance. Jusek always talks about this, said Etain. I've seen a few squads do it, Get said. It came via Scarata, I hear. Yes. Etain was wondering how she would ever measure up to that man. Halfway would have been enough. He taught all the commandos to live up to their Mandalorian heritage. You know, customs, language, ideals. She was mesmerized by the unconscious precisions of the men, who were all exactly the same height. It's very weird. It's like they have a compulsion to do it. Yes, we do, Get said. It's very stirring. I'm sorry. That was rude of me. No problem, General. It certainly wasn't part of our trooper training on Commando. It gets passed on from man to man now. He looked restless. She knew what he was thinking. General, give me the recorder, she said, and smiled. Go ahead. Get touched his glove to his brow, and shot off down the ladder to the deck, sliding the last 3 meters on the handrails. It was delightful to see the mix of armor, yellow-striped commanders and pilots, plain white troopers, and the motley mix of commando colors, drawn together in one ancient Mandalorian ritual, every face the same. Etain felt adrift, excluded. She had never truly felt this degree of bond with her Jedi clan. The connection in the Force was there, yes, but no. The real strength here was attachment, passion, identity, meaning. She thought of Master Foulier, the man who insisted she have a second chance as a Padawan, and not be consigned to build refugee camps, because she lacked control. The man who was also passionate and prone to taking on causes. The Jedi who lost his life because he couldn't stay out of a fight when Gez Hokan's militia roughed up the locals on Quilora. Etain thought that wasn't such a bad sort of Jedi to be. Not textbook, but centered on fair play and justice. The clone soldiers were worth that too. She was suddenly aware of Daman looking up at her, grinning, and if it hadn't been for his armor and surroundings, he could have been any young man showing off his prowess to a woman. She smiled back. She still envied him, his focus and discipline, especially as he had somehow managed not to lose it after being exposed to a galaxy that didn't quite resemble the ideal he had probably been taught about on Commando. But Cal Scarata had largely been responsible for his training. She didn't know Scarata yet, but one thing was certain of was that he was just like a Jedi, a pragmatic man who dealt in reality. The dull water went on for verse after repeated verse. Then the klaxon sounded, and the pipe came over the address system. Port duties men, close up. Damage and fire control parties to stations. Prepare to dock. Commander Git broke out of the ranks and came bounding back up the ladder, wiping sweat from his face with a neatly folded piece of cloth. General, will you come to the bridge to see the ship alongside? I won't be much help, but I'd like that, yes. It was as if she were leaving a ship after a long association's a retiring captain. She was only a temporary officer, but still, Git treated her as if she actually had some importance to the crew. And she found that touching. She stood at the command console and watched as the docking grapnels and platforms slipped past the view screen, and the crew maneuvered, fearless on instruments. Git headed the con. Stop reactor. Stop reactor, Commander. Reactor stopped. Fearless's secondary propulsions shivered into silence. The vessel slipped gradually into dock on the power of tugs, bringing her alongside portside 2, as Etain had now learned to call it. She walked slowly across the bridge to watch the dockside team getting a bow in place to disembark those members of the crew being transferred and to allow maintenance, and replenishment teams to board. There was the slightest of jarring sensations as the ship came to rest against huge dock fenders. Fearless was back safely in her home port for the time being. Etane held out her hand to get. "Gloves off, my friend." He shrugged, smiling, and slipped off the entire gauntlet. They shook hands as equals. Then she pressed a key on the console, opening the public address system that reached every cabin and flat-end hangar and mess deck in a huge warship. "Gentlemen," she said, "it's been an honor." 6. In 5 millennia, the Mandalorians fought with and against 1,000 armies on 1,000 worlds. They learned to speak as many languages and absorbed weapons, technology, and tactics from every war. And yet, despite the overwhelming influence of alien cultures and the absence of a true homeworld and even species, their own language not only survived but changed little. Their way of life and their philosophy remained untouched, and their ideals and sense of family, of identity, of nations, were only strengthened. Armor does not make a Mandalorian. The armor is simply a manifestation of an impenetrable, unassailable heart. Mandalorians, Identity and Language, published by the Galactic Institute of Anthropology. RAS Fearless, Upper Dock, Fleet Support Depot, Coruscant, 370 days after Geonosis. The ramp went down, and for once, the scene that greeted Phi wasn't hostile droid-infested territory and red blasts of fire, but Coruscant, impossibly high towers and deep canyons of skylines, was every bit as alien as Geonosis. Phi had seen it once before, all too briefly on the way to break a siege at the spaceport. It had been an exotic, exciting lightscape at night, but in daylight it was breathtaking, in a totally different way. "Can we have a run ashore?" Nina stood with his hands clasped behind him, with his D slung across his back. "Not my call. I'm not the sergeant now." Boss and the rest of Delta had formed up behind Omega in a neat line, presenting a more orderly rank. They were on the same comlink. Nina said it was ungrateful to block them out, seeing as they'd ridden to the rescue. But Omega would never hear the end of it. Phi was sure of that. The 41st Elite were disembarked first. Squash leaned a little closer to Phi. He was right behind him. The nice thing about Katana helmet comlinks was that you could switch between circuits and have totally private exchanges without any external sign that you were talking, or even having a stand-up fight. Come to that. "So, you want a run ashore?" was that Civ said. Phi enjoyed Scarata's wide-ranging and often bizarre language. No other squads talked quite like Sergeant Cal's. A night out on the town, dinner, at a fine restaurant perhaps, take in a Mongol ballet. "Yeah, right. Don't Phi," Nina said. "You're just being cruel to the Weequay team here. Okay, ale and walnuts. Non ballet. And maybe a little shopping with your spook squad buddy, Scott said. Newcomer, maybe? Ah, news did travel then. Don't let Oro hear you say that, Fi said. He'll rip your legs off and hit you with the soggy end. Yeah, ox are all mouths and commas. Oh, hard man, eh? I've seen Twi'lek dancing girls tougher than you, said Squatch. How many times are we going to have to save your shibs then? Probably as many times as we have to clean up your Osek, said Nina. Can't you two talk about blowing stuff up and play nicely? Where's the general? Fi said. Daman interrupted, saying goodbye to Git. He seemed to be taking a keen interest in Etaine's whereabouts. Can you see Sergeant Cal yet? She said he was meeting us. So, you've been ordered around by a geriatric and a child, have you? Daman's voice frosted over. Scorch. Do you like med center food? Touchy touchy. There was a faint click on the helmet's comlink. Delta. This is the geriatric. Get down and give me 50 now. Fiafek sighed. Omega parted ranks to give Delta the room to perform 50 press-ups in full armor, with backpacks. Fi watched appreciatively. He didn't care for Sev at all. But he was also scanning the landing platform for Skarata, desperate to see his real sergeant again. When Skarata was around, Nina ceased to play the senior NCO. Generals tended not to get much of a look in, either. Skarata was his own command chain. That was 40, not 50, Skarata said from somewhere behind them. I hate innumeracy almost as much as I hate cracks about my personal state of disrepair. Skarata just had a knack for sliding around unnoticed. There had been times when Fi had wondered if he was a Force user, because only Jedi were supposed to be able to pull those kinds of stunts. But Cal Bier was adamant that he was simply good at his job, because he'd been doing it since he was 7 years old. That made him a late starter by clone standards. He appeared suddenly from between a knot of 41st men and ambled over to Omega, not limping quite as badly as usual, and looking rather dapper in a smart leather jacket and rough working clothes. He could disappear, but the jacket changed him utterly. Yet there was always something about the man that inspired relief and confidence. Fi felt instantly ready for anything, just as he had when Skarata had been the highest authority in his limited world on Commando. Skarata paused for a moment in front of him. He didn't seem worried whether Delta had cranked out the extra 10 press-ups or not. He just clutched Fi's arm and hugged Daman, and slapped Nina across the shoulders, and grabbed Ayrton's hand. He never seemed to have the slightest trouble now in showing how much he cared about them. Over the years, he'd changed from shielding his emotions behind a veneer of good-natured abuse to abandoning the pretense altogether. Nobody had ever been fooled by it anyway. Don't scare me like that again, Adike. He turned to Delta, easing themselves up from the floor. And you bunch of Daikut too. I'd better keep a tighter rein on you. He watched the last of the 41st men disappearing into transfer vessels, presumably for return to barracks, and something appeared to amuse him. Scorch. If you're not a good boy, then I'm going to make you wear a comma. Sorry, Sergeant. Is it true that Sergeant Vow's back? He is back, but he is not a sergeant. I'm your sergeant now, Scorch. And General Drusik? He's not your sergeant either. Scarza looked past Scorch, and seemed suddenly startled. Vi turned and saw what he was staring at. He turned to Mukan, walked across the huge landing platform, hauling the LJ-50 as if it were putting up a fight. That has to be General Termuken, yes? That's her, Daman said. She's very keen to meet you. Vi was distracted by a blip of movement in his HUD. A scruffy civilian air taxi had risen over the parapet of the landing platform, and it shouldn't have been able to do that. His unconscious brain said danger, and reacted a split second before his ingrained training reminded him that unidentified civies vessels shouldn't penetrate the fleet base cordon. He was on one knee with his Ds charged, and aimed before he even noticed from his HUD that Omega and Delta had both formed up into a single front contact formation. The taxi stopped dead in mid-air. Check, Scarata stepped in front of them. Vi froze, but Delta aimed around the sergeant. Stand down. One fist held up, clenched to hold off the squads. Scarata signaled vigorously to the taxi with his other hand held flat, slapping down on the ear drop. The taxi settled slowly on the platform. Omega stopped dead at the check command. Delta took a second longer. Maybe it hadn't been drilled into them, as it had Scarata's batch. But all of them still had their rifles trained. Vi's heart pounded. They were all round, tight, and still alert to any threat. Alert enough to let hard-trained reactions take over. It was what kept you alive. You could never switch it off. Your muscles learned to do things and then stopped asking your brain's permission. I'm sorry, lads. Scarata spun around to face them. Udisi, relax. It's ours. I'm glad you pointed that out, Sarge, Nina muttered. He lowered his Ds. Vi followed his lead and glanced behind him. Etain was still lying prone, with a concussion rifle aimed in the right directions. No easy task with a weapon that size, but her arc of fire left something to be desired. He hoped that her Jedi sense of right place and right time would have stopped her from blowing them all to pieces if she had opened fire. Vi gestured to her to stand down, and then gave up and just shook his head at her. No. She gestured back, palm up, and jumped to her feet. He wondered if anyone had thought to teach her basic hand signals. Scarata was still apologizing. I should have warned you I had transport coming. That was sloppy of me. The taxi's hatch opened and a Wookiee, not a big one, just over a couple of meters tall, unfolded itself from the taxi and clambered out, throwing its head back and yowling in complaint. Okay, my fault, Scarata said. He held both hands up in admission to the mountains of glossy brown fur. They're just jumpy, that's all. We'll load it now. All of us in that? Nana asked. It wasn't a very big taxi. With a Wookiee too? No, the prisoners. Just load 'em in. Where are they going? That's all you need to know right now. Nina paused, then shrugged and beckoned Boss, Fixer and Atin to follow him back on board Fearless. Etain had moved forward by now and walked up to Scarata's rifle, slung across her back. She was so small that she looked more like a bolt-on accessory to the weapon. Daman reacted and stepped in to get Scarata's attention. It wasn't that he needed to, of course. Scarata was watching Etain, and he seemed to have one eye on Fearless's ramp, and he was placating to the clearly irritated Wookiee, somehow juggling situations as skillfully as he had ever done. General, he said. He paused to nod formally to Etain, which, given Scarata's general contempt for anyone not in armor, seemed quite an encouraging start. I decided we've got a nice new job, and that includes you. Sergeant, she said, and bowed her head. You're not what I expected. Scarata raised an eyebrow. Nor are you, General. He shoved the Wookiee back a few meters, apparently untroubled by the fact that the creature could have used him for a cleaning rag. He rounded on it. No, just put them on the back seat and drive. Let Val do the rest. The mention of Val gave Vi a hint of what he couldn't grasp from the Sherrywook words. So the Wookiee was delivering the prisoners to Roland Val. It seemed to have volunteered to do something that Scarata preferred to leave to old Psycho then. The Wookiees obviously wasn't asking if they wanted to stop for lunch. What's happening here? Etain asked. What's happening to the prisoners? Civilian matters, General, Scarata said, and stood back as Nina and Boss jogged past, steering a medbay repulsor with what looked like 3 large rolls of blanket on it. They bundled each into the back of the taxi with a little grunting and cursing, then slammed one hatch closed. Don't you worry about it. But I am worrying about it. The Wookiee barked once and folded itself back into the taxi. The vessel lifted off and swung back over the parapet, dropping below their view into one of the artificial canyons that seemed to reach down into Coruscant's core. Vi fought the urge to peer at it, after it, then lost and walked a few paces to gaze over the edge. It was a long, long way down. He was thrilled by the sheer scale and variety of it. Polished stone, sparkling glass, a blur of vessels in the sky lanes, hazing sunlight. Alien. Utterly alien. Scarata blew out a breath and rocked his head slightly as if easing tense neck muscles. General, he said, you and I need to talk. Omega, Delta. A transport will be taking you back to barracks. He paused to check his chrono. You just relax until 1500 hours and then you report to the briefing room at HQ main admin building. Yes, Sarge, said Nina, and Boss absolutely synchronized. But Etain wasn't giving up. Vi rather liked that about her. But she could be a pain in the shebs when she persisted. She stepped a little closer to Scarata. I don't like being left in the dark, Sergeant. Then this galaxy is going to be a constant source of disappointment to you, General. For a second, Scarata had that edge in his voice that made Vi stiffen. But it softened as soon as it hit its target. Things change. You can say no to this, and I'm rather hoping you won't. But if you do, then Omega, Delta, and my Null boys will do it without you. Eating lapsed into silence. Scarata could motivate a brick if he put his mind to it. She wanted to stick with the squad, and everyone knew it. She looked at him as if she was listening to other voices. If Omega can't say no, then neither can I. Good, said Scarata. He peeled back the collar of his jacket and muttered into a tiny comlink. It looked as if General Jusik still had a taste for supplying unusual kit. Standing by, Vi peered back over the dark platform parapet, gripping the safety rail to lean out a little more and get a better look. It was the kind of view the very wealthy paid a fortune to see from their window. But you could get it for free in the Grand Army, as long as you didn't mind getting your head shot off to qualify for the privilege. Scarata leaned against the parapet beside him. I like to fast rope down there, Vi said. He'd always enjoyed that in training on Commando. He preferred endless vistas to cramped spaces. So did many of his brothers. They said it was the legacy of being gestated in glass vats. Odo claimed he could even remember it. How long have we got here, Sarge? Can we see some of the city, please? Yeah, I promised. You all a night out, didn't I? How long ago? 8 months, if I remembered. All right. Straight after the spaceport siege, the promise of a drink from Captain O'Brim for a job well done. And then Odo hauled them straight off for another mission. I'd love to see it once before He paused. I just like to explore a bit. Scarata's brow creased briefly, and he put his hand on Vi's back. Don't talk like that, son. You'll see plenty of this, I promise. Now. Far below, something that might have been a bird leapt suddenly into the yawning crevices of buildings and plummeted at high speed, with wings folded back until Vi lost sight of it. The platform was at least 5,000 meters high. That'd be a nice change. So, you like the new battlefields then? Vi dragged himself away from the apparently limitless view. So, we get a spell in a stone frigate? What? Just something I'd picked up from the lads on board Fearless. So he taught Sergeant Cal some new slang. That was something, a shore-based job. feeling flimsy and answering the comlinks. Lots of calf breaks. Try threat resolutions interdictions. Oh. Welcome to the world of euphemisms. 5. We are going to be fighting in the hottest terrain of all. Right in the middle of billions of civvies. Slaughtering bad guys on Coruscant. Good, said Phi. I hate commuting. Aka Company Barracks. ESA Brigade HQ Coruscant. Etain trailed Scarata down the long passage that ran from the main doors of the Aka Barak ring, and felt like she was following a Gadan. Omega Scraw's description had made her think of him as a kindly old uncle, a veteran soldier with a facade of tough talk, who had sweated blood to give her generations of boys the benefit of his wisdom. But what she experienced in the Force was very different, just as his appearance was unlike her mental image of him. He was a whirlpool of balance, conflict, truly cold black violence, shot through with deep red passionate loves and hatreds. It marked him out as a complex man who had built a warrior elite. If she looked at him another way, though, he was very much the dark side, everything she had been taught to shun. Yes, he reminded her of a Gadan, the nasty little carnivores that hunted in packs on Quilora, and would take on any prey, small by comparison with his strapping troops, but ferociously, tenaciously aggressive. And he wasn't quite the elderly man the squad had first described either. To 20-year-old boys, he must have seemed ancient, but he was about 60 standard years, just middle-aged, and obviously fit accepted for his tendency to drag his left leg. And he looked armored. He was only wearing a civilian jacket, polished tan bantha leather, with a high black collar, and plain brown pants. But he had that same presence that all the commandos had. He was ready for something. Given that he was a head shorter than his squad, had a pronounced limp, and yet still looked like trouble. Etain decided he must have once been a formidable soldier. She realized he still was. In here, ma'am. He could make ma'am sound like girl, somehow. He could do the same with General, but as a Jedi, she had no right to feel affronted by lack of deference. She realized that she simply wished he would like her. Just a little chat, and then you can find General Jusik and catch up on events. Yes, Scarata gave the orders. He ushered her into the slide room that turned out to be a cabin with a table and a chair and narrow bed, with a half-packed carryall sitting on it. There was a neat pile of clothing, military-grade fabric, equipment cases with unidentifiable lumpy items in them, and a set of sand gold battle-scarred Mandalorian armor. The Force told her this was a tidy room, filled with the wretched chaos of broken lives, pain and misery. She wondered if it was entirely his, but she stopped herself from probing further, in case he felt it and reacted. He was a dangerously perceptive man. She had no sense at all of any animosity directed at her. "That's a fine helmet," she said. It had detailed crimson and gold sigils, and the alloy section that formed the eyepiece T of the visor was jet black. There was telltale scrapes and gouges as if some huge creature had clawed at it. "Does Faisal have Hoken's armor?" Scarata nodded. "Certainly has. Nana said he could have it, and he keeps it stashed in his locker." Eugene thought of Gez Hoken and how she had first mistaken Daman for Kulora's brutal enforcer, simply because of that sinister helmet with its T-shaped slit. They had the helmet now, and that was because Etana had taken Hoken's head off with a lightsaber nearly a year and a lifetime ago, when she was still not used to killing. It was red armor with a distinctive gray trim. She recalled that vividly. Mandalorian helmets didn't look half so fearsome now. The shape was familiar. It was even welcome. But she had somehow forgotten that Scarata and most of the training sergeants who had been recruited to forge boys like Daman into elite commandos had been Mandalorian mercenaries handpicked by Jango Fett. She wondered if she would have seen Scarata the same way 9 months earlier, had he been her enemy on Kulora. Packing or unpacking? Packing. He lifted the fabric bags carefully, and they made a metallic clunk. "Weapons. We can't operate out of here. Officially, we're off duty and on indefinite leave." He laid the armor plates in the bag and layered the clothing between them, then slid in the fabric case ribbons. It occurred to her that this was probably all he owned. The nomadic mercenary ready to move on to the next war. "Are you squeamish, General?" "I mean ethically squeamish. I'm a Jedi, Sergeant." "Well, that answers a lot of questions I didn't ask. Ask me a specific questions." "Do you know what Black Ops means?" "Oh, yes. I thought you might. I had no idea you would be coming back with Omega right now. But he spent 4 months with Zay on Quilora, turning the locals into guerrillas to fight the Seps, right? And before that, you survived when Master Fulia didn't. So I reckon you're pretty handy in a scrap. I know my weaknesses." Scarata paused and looked up from his packing. Best knowledge of all. "Just tell me what's at stake," Etain said. "Now there's an interesting request from a Jedi." He put his hand carefully in the side of the carryall and withdrew a small cloth-wrapped package. When he unwrapped it and held it out in his palm, she could see it held small scan bars mounted on fragments on white plastoid alloy. "For me, stopping more of these. For the Republic. Stopping activity that limits the ability of the Grand Army to deploy. For the Senate, showing the Seps that they can't strike here at will. Take your pick." She knew what the objectives were now. She'd seen them on hundreds of chest plates. They were armor tallies, the identification devices of all clone soldiers wore. "I'll take the first options," she thought, "of the other 5. the one who was no longer alive, to be boyishly excited like his namesake at the prospect of seeing the croissant that lay beyond the barracks. You believe I'll be of some use. In urban operations, a woman is always useful, Jedi or not. Another aid to invisibility. Old Decoot, like me, and females like you. Skaraza smiled and rewrapped the armor tallies. Etienne reached into her bag and realized that she had even fewer possessions than this nomad. And General Drusik is part of this operation? What about Master Zay? General Zay is not officially aware of this. If you're not operating out of here, then where? Oh, somewhere interesting. Give me a couple of days, and then we can relocate. Besides, the boys need some rest. So, he wasn't going to tell her. Fine. Delta seem a little different from Omega. I take it you have confidence in them? Oh, they're good lads. He fumbled in his jacket pockets and pulled out credit chips, scraps of flimsy, and a nasty-looking metal device, crested with a row of short savage spikes, and that appeared to have holes for 4 fingers. She stared. He placed it on the table. The hormone that makes them hard fighters is the same one that makes them a bit of a handful too. The contents of Skaraza's jackets continued to pile up on the table. A coil of thin wire, a 15-centimeter knife with a tapering 3-sided blade, a stubby custom blaster, and a length of heavy sharp-edged chain joined the cache. Not that the poor Adaik are ever off duty, of course. But when you say the word, they're on the case like that. He snapped his fingers to make the point of immediacy. Yes, she'd seen that. Karata took off his jacket, revealing surprisingly broad shoulders and an underarm holster holding what looked like a modified Vapine shadowgun. He hung the garment over the back of the chair. Etienne estimated he was still exceptionally fit in the wiry way of small men, and continued to revise her view of him as a man who could only train others to fight. And as she had never seen so many instruments devoted to injury and destruction in one man's possessions, not even a Republic Commando, she indicated the weapons with a cocked head and waited for a hint of why he was carrying them. Scarata paused, one hand raking his short grey hair. What? He said, looking bemused. The kit. He was a walking armory. The weapons. Oh, don't worry. He clearly didn't understand. I don't carry many tools when I'm in civilian areas. Don't want to be too conspicuous. Odo looks after the rest of it. We'll be properly cannoned up when we deploy. Guess what? Got 6 Vapine sniper rifles, custom made, and EMP hardened, exquisite. Not really rifles, 'cause they don't have rifle barrels, but... He grinned, suddenly apparently distracted by a thought. And she had a brief and vivid vision of another man's entirely. You haven't met Ordo yet, have you? He's a fine lad, pride of my heart. Really he is. Him and his brothers. Etienne was totally disarmed by his candor which seemed both incongruous and yet in keeping with a man who had gone to such extraordinary length to equip his young charges to survive. She knew he was a killer. She knew his people had a long history of killing Jedi, even fighting for the Sith. She knew exactly what he was, but she couldn't help liking him, and knowing that he would be very, very important to her for the rest of her life. Her certainty was in the Force, and she knew what was coming in the days and months ahead would take her beyond her limits and would bring her no sense of peace or understanding as a Jedi, but the Force would show her what intended her destiny to be.